Hey, everyone. So today, we're diving into something that's been on a lot of people's minds lately: inflation. It's a term we hear all the time, but what does it really mean for us as individuals? How does it affect our day-to-day financial lives? If you're feeling like the cost of everything is going up, you're not alone. Whether it's groceries, gas, or even rent, inflation can have a huge impact on your personal finances. Let's break down exactly how inflation works, what it means for you, and, most importantly, how you can protect yourself and your finances during periods of high inflation. What is inflation? Let's start with the basics. What is inflation? In simple terms, inflation is the rate at which the prices of goods and services increase over time. When inflation is high, the value of money decreases. In other words, the same amount of money buys you less than it did before. For example, if inflation is at 5%, that means something that cost $100 last year would now cost $105 this year. It's important to note that inflation is normal to some degree. Most central banks, like the Federal Reserve in the US, actually aim for a small, steady inflation rate, typically around 2%. But when inflation spikes suddenly, it can really hit our pockets hard. Why is inflation happening right now? So, why is inflation such a hot topic at the moment? Well, there are a few factors driving it. The pandemic shook up global supply chains, which led to shortages in goods and services. At the same time, governments around the world pumped massive amounts of money into their economies through stimulus programs and low interest rates. While these moves helped the economy recover, they also created more demand for goods at a time when supplies were limited, pushing prices higher. Now, as economies are recovering, we're still seeing the effects of those supply chain disruptions, rising wages, and high demand for goods and services, all of which are contributing to inflation. How inflation affects your everyday expenses. Alright, now let's get into how inflation directly impacts your personal finances. One of the most noticeable effects is on your purchasing power. When inflation is high, the dollars in your wallet don't go as far. Everything from the groceries you buy, to the gas you pump, to the clothes you wear starts costing more. So, what used to be a $50 trip to the store may now cost $60 or more. Take food, for example. In recent years, inflation has led to noticeable increases in food prices. From meat to dairy to produce, consumers have been feeling the pinch. And the same goes for gas prices. We've all seen those moments when you're at the pump, and you're wondering how gas went up 50 cents overnight. Additionally, rent and housing costs are also highly impacted by inflation. When the cost of living rises, landlords may increase rent prices to keep up with inflation. This can make it harder for renters to find affordable housing, especially in areas where rents have already been climbing for years. Impact on savings and investments. Now, let's talk about savings. If you're saving money in a traditional savings account, you're likely seeing your savings lose value in real terms. Inflation erodes the purchasing power of the money you've saved. For example, if you're earning 1% interest in a savings account and inflation is at 5%, your money is effectively losing value by 4% each year. It's important to keep this in mind when considering your savings strategy. You'll need to be smart about where you park your money to protect it from inflation. That's where investing comes in. Stocks, real estate, and other investment options typically outpace inflation over the long term. If you're not yet investing, now might be a good time to start thinking about ways to grow your wealth and stay ahead of inflation. How inflation affects debt. Here's the thing about debt during inflationary periods: it can actually work in your favor if you have fixed rate debt. That means if you have a mortgage, student loans, or other fixed interest loans, the value of your debt decreases over time because you're paying it back with money that's worth less than when you initially borrowed it. So, while it may feel like you're carrying more financial burden, the actual real value of your debt is shrinking. On the flip side, if you have variable rate debt, like credit cards or certain types of loans, inflation can make things worse. As inflation rises, central banks typically increase interest rates to control the economy. This can cause the interest rates on your loans to rise, meaning you'll be paying more over time. So, if you have high interest debt, paying it off quickly during periods of inflation becomes even more crucial. The longer you hold onto it, the more expensive it becomes. How inflation affects retirement plans. If you're saving for retirement, inflation should definitely be on your radar. The money you're putting aside today may not go as far when you retire, especially if you're relying on cash savings or low return investments. $1 today might not be worth $1 in 20 or 30 years. That's why it's so important to consider inflation when planning for the future. Investing in assets like stocks, bonds, and real estate, things that tend to grow in value over time, can help your retirement savings outpace inflation. Also, don't forget about inflation-protected securities. These are government bonds that adjust with inflation, so you can maintain purchasing power even as prices rise. How to protect yourself from inflation? Now that we understand how inflation impacts personal finances, let's talk about ways to protect yourself during inflationary periods. Here are a few strategies. Invest in assets that outpace inflation. As mentioned earlier, stocks, real estate, and other investments can help grow your wealth and keep up with inflation. The stock market, over time, tends to beat inflation, so long-term investing in diversified assets is key. Focus on paying down high-interest debt. If you have credit card debt or variable rate loans, focus on paying them down as quickly as possible. The interest rates on these types of debts can skyrocket during inflationary periods, making it harder to get out from under them. Create a budget. Inflation means your expenses are going up, so it's a good idea to create or revisit your budget. Look for areas where you can cut back. Small changes, like cooking at home more, cutting subscriptions you don't use, or shopping smarter, can add up and help you adjust to higher costs. Consider inflation-protected investments. Look into Treasury inflation-protected securities, TIPS, or other inflation-protected assets. These investments are specifically designed to help keep pace with rising prices. Increase your income if you can. Look for ways to increase your income. This could mean negotiating a raise, starting a side hustle, or finding ways to diversify your revenue streams. Earning more money can help counterbalance the higher costs of living. Conclusion: inflation might feel like a huge challenge, but it's not something you can't manage with the right strategies. By being aware of how inflation affects your expenses, savings, investments, and debt, you can make smarter financial decisions and protect yourself during uncertain times. Whether it's cutting back on spending, focusing on paying off high-interest debt, or investing in assets that outpace inflation, you have the tools to navigate this financial hurdle. Remember, inflation is a natural part of the economy, but it doesn't have to be a financial burden if you're prepared. Stay informed, stay proactive, and your finances will stay in a good place no matter what the economy throws your way. Thanks for tuning in, and if you found this video helpful, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more personal finance tips. Until next time.